The ground was breathing. That was the first thing Solene said. Not that she was cold, not that her boots had soaked through 2 days ago, not that she hadn't eaten anything real since Tuesday. Just that. The ground is breathing, Grandma. I almost didn't stop walking. 62 years old, a dead husband, a house I no longer owned, a granddaughter I barely knew standing in the middle of a Tennessee forest, pointing at a hill covered in wet moss and old roots. I had nothing left to lose and nowhere particular to be. But something in her voice made me turn around. And then I saw it. Beneath the twisted roots of a dying willow, half swallowed by the earth itself, was a door. Dark oak. Old iron handle. Real hinges. Not a cellar door. Not an animal den. A door that someone had built with their own 2 hands and then let the forest slowly take back. I stood there in the cold rain and looked at it for a long moment. 62 years of doing the sensible thing. 62 years of keeping moving, keeping quiet, keeping the lights on for everyone else until there were no lights left. I reached out and pulled the handle. The smell that came up from the darkness below was dry herbs, old wood, and smoke that had lived inside those walls for a very long time. And I thought someone built this to last. I just didn't know yet what it would cost us to stay. The ground was breathing. That was what she said. My 19-year-old granddaughter standing in the middle of a Tennessee forest in the rain, pointing at a hill. Not at a bear, not at a person, at a hill. I turned around slowly. Because after 2 days of walking with wet boots and an empty stomach and a backpack that felt like it was filled with everything I'd lost, I didn't have the energy to be surprised by much anymore. But I turned around. Solene was standing very still between 2 pine trees, her hood pushed back despite the rain, her head tilted slightly to one side. The way she used to tilt it as a little girl when she was listening for something the adults couldn't hear. I knew that because her father used to do the same thing. And I knew that because I had spent 30 years trying not to think about her father and failing at it constantly. She was pointing at the slope, just an old hill covered in wet moss, long grass flattened by rain, thick roots twisting out of the earth from trees that had been dying slowly for decades. The kind of hill you'd walk past 100 times and never look at twice. Except beneath one of those roots, beneath the twisted base of a willow tree that had given up on being a tree and become something closer to a ruin, there was wood, dark wood, old oak boards buried deep into the earth. I stepped closer. The rain was picking up. My shoulders ached from the pack straps, and my left knee had been complaining since yesterday morning. And I was 62 years old and standing in a forest in Calder County, Tennessee, because a bank had decided that a signature on a piece of paper I never signed was legally mine to honor. But I stepped closer anyway, because that was a door. Not a cellar hatch, not an animal burrow, not a piece of fallen timber the earth had swallowed over the years. A real door, with iron hinges, dark and rusted, and set deliberately into the side of the hill, as if someone had decided the hill needed an entrance and gone ahead and built one. I reached out and touched the handle. The metal was ice cold. Colder than the rain. Colder than the air. The kind of cold that comes from deep underground where the sun has never reached. Solene moved up beside me without saying anything. We both looked at it. Neither of us moved for a moment. "Do you think someone lives here?" she said. I looked around at the trees. No smoke above the tree line. No path worn into the earth. No sound except the rain, and somewhere far behind us, water running over rocks. "I don't know," I said. And then, because the cold had already gotten back inside my jacket and my hands were shaking again, and we hadn't had a real meal in 2 days, and I was 62 years old, and out of better ideas, I pulled the handle. The door opened slowly. A long wooden creak that seemed to travel up through the roots and into the trees above. A wave of air drifted out. Not cold, not damp. Something warmer. Something that smelled of dry herbs and old wood and the ghost of smoke that had lived inside those walls for a very long time. Solene made a small sound beside me. Not quite a word. I understood it anyway. The staircase was narrow, uneven dirt steps reinforced with old timber disappearing down into the dark. I went first, because that is what you do when you are the grandmother and the granddaughter is 19 and looking at you with wide eyes that are trying very hard to look unafraid. My boots found the steps one at a time. Dirt crumbled softly at the edges. The smell grew stronger as we went deeper, drier, older, like a place that had been sealed against the world and had kept its own air intact for years. Then my feet touched wood, a real floor. I reached into my jacket pocket and found the last candle we had. My hands were shaking as I lit it. For a second, there was nothing but the small flame and the dark pressing in from every side. Then the flame steadied, and the room came forward out of the darkness slowly, the way a photograph develops, detail by detail. A bed against the wall. Real frame old blankets folded at one end. A small iron stove. Wooden shelves along 2 walls lined with empty glass jars and a few that weren't empty. A stack of firewood beside the stove. Dry. Carefully arranged. An iron pan hanging on a hook. A hook. Someone had put up a hook. I stood there with the candle and looked at it all and felt something I hadn't felt in several weeks. I couldn't name it immediately. It took me a moment. Safe. That was it. The room felt safe. Soline had come down behind me and was standing in the middle of the floor, turning slowly, taking it all in. Her face in the candlelight was strange, open, unguarded. She looked younger than 19. She looked about 12. It feels like somebody actually cared about this place, she said quietly. I didn't answer. I was looking at the firewood, dry wood, carefully stacked. Not the haphazard pile of someone who'd dumped an armload and left. Each piece placed with attention. Someone had stacked that wood the way you stack wood when you want it to be there when you need it. I set the candle down on the shelf and crouched beside the stove and opened the small metal door. Cold ash inside, gray and settled. Not fresh, not from yesterday or last week, but the smell of old smoke was in the walls the way smells get into walls when fires have been lit in the same place over many years. I put 3 pieces of wood inside. Soline crouched beside me and held the candle close. I found a rusted tin of matches on the shelf above the stove. 4 matches left. The first one didn't catch. The second one did. We both watched the small flame find the wood, hesitate, almost go out, and then hold. The crackle started softly, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been missing until I heard it again. The sound of a fire deciding to become a fire. It spread slowly, each piece of wood, accepting the warmth from the one beside it, and within a few minutes, the stove was breathing, and the room was different. Warmer, fuller, less like an underground chamber and more like somewhere a person could exist. Soline stretched her hands toward the heat immediately. I did the same. The warmth hurt at first. That particular ache of frozen fingers coming back to life that is somehow worse than the cold itself. But neither of us pulled away. Outside, the rain was still falling. I could hear it faintly, a soft percussion on the earth above us. But down there under the hill, it felt very far away. We didn't speak for a while. There was nothing to say that the fire wasn't already saying. I should explain how we got here. How a 62-year-old retired nurse and a 19-year-old girl she barely knew ended up walking into a forest in November with 2 backpacks and nowhere to go. It starts with a piece of paper I never signed. My husband Garrett died 14 months ago. Quietly, the way he did most things. A stroke in his sleep, the doctor said. He didn't suffer, the doctor said. I sat in the parking lot of the hospital afterward and tried to feel something, and mostly felt the particular numbness of a person who has been braced for bad news for so long that when it finally arrives, it just confirms what the body already knew. We had been married 31 years. We had a house on the east side of Calder County with a garden I maintained, and a porch where I drank my coffee every morning, and a kitchen where I had cooked 31 years of meals. I knew every creak in that floor. I knew where the light fell in the afternoon in October. I knew which drawer stuck
and which window let in the cold, and exactly how many to get from the bedroom to the kitchen in the dark without turning on a light.
I thought it was mine. It turned out Garrett had taken a second mortgage out on it 7 years before he died, when his business was struggling. He hadn't told me. I don't know if he meant to tell me eventually, or if he planned to pay it back before I ever had to know. I never got to ask him. He was gone before the bank's third letter arrived, before I understood what the first 2 letters had even been about. The lawyers were not unkind. They were just doing their jobs. The house was gone by September. I had a car, a savings account that would last 8 months if I was careful, a retirement from the nursing board that covered almost nothing, and a storage unit in town with the things I'd managed to keep. I also had, as of 3 weeks ago, a granddaughter I had met exactly twice. Solene showed up on the same day the last of my furniture went into storage. She was standing beside the storage unit with a backpack and a look on her face that I recognized because it was the same look I'd been wearing for 6 months. The look of someone trying very hard to seem like they were handling things. Her father was my son, my only child. He and I had not spoken in 11 years. She handed me a folded note, her father's handwriting. It said, "Mom, this is Solene. She needs somewhere to be for a while. I'm sorry I can't explain more than that right now. I'm sorry about a lot of things." That was it. I read it twice. Then I looked at Solene. Then I said, "Have you eaten today?" She said, "Not really." So we got in the car and drove to a diner, and I bought her a grilled cheese, and I had coffee, and we sat across from each other and didn't know what to say. And then the car broke down on Route 9 the next morning, and we had been walking ever since. That is how you end up in a forest at 62. In steps so small, each one seemed reasonable. The morning after we found the underground house, I woke before dawn to the sound of birds somewhere above the hill. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the soft orange glow still breathing inside the stove, and Solene asleep under the old blankets against the far wall, one arm tucked under her cheek, and I remembered. The room was warm, real warm, the kind that gets into your bones. I lay still for a minute and listened to the birds and to the fire and to the silence that lives underneath those 2 sounds in a place where no cars pass and no neighbors run leaf blowers and no one is going to knock on the door. Then I got up. I added 2 more pieces of wood to the stove, quietly, not waking her. And then I started looking more carefully at the room. A nurse looks at a room the way a nurse looks at a patient, systematically. What is here? What is functioning? What needs attention? What is being held together with old repairs and stubbornness? The walls were timber-framed solid, no visible rot in the main boards. The floor had soft spots near the far corner, but the boards themselves were intact. The shelves were handmade, rough but level built, by someone who knew what they were doing and didn't care much about appearances. The iron stove was old but serviceable. I could see someone had patched a seam near the bottom with the material I didn't recognize, but which had held for what looked like many years. Someone had built this place to last, not to impress anyone, just to last. I checked the glass jars on the shelves. Most empty, washed, and stored, but 3 near the back wall had contents dried herbs I recognized from the garden I used to keep. Rosemary, thyme, something with small gray-green leaves that might have been oregano or might have been something else entirely. Sealed tight. Still good. I found the storage room behind a low door near the back wall that I'd taken for a panel the night before. Inside a wooden crate, half buried under an old cloth. I pulled the cloth back. Potatoes, maybe 20. Small and a little soft, but whole. Protected from the cold by the earth itself. I stared at them for a long moment. Then I carried them back near the stove and started the first real meal we'd had in 3 days. The sound of potatoes in the iron pan woke Soline. I heard her shift, then go still. Then I heard her say in a voice that was half asleep and fully suspicious, "Are you cooking?" "I found potatoes," I said. A pause. "In the ground house. In the storage room." Another pause. I could hear her sitting up. "How long have they been there?" "Long enough," I said. "Not too long." "Not too." She appeared in the doorway of the storage room, blanket around her shoulders, hair going in several directions, looking at the potatoes in the pan with an expression I can only describe as cautious hope. The expression of someone who wants very badly to be glad about something, but has been disappointed enough times recently to not commit to it fully yet. I added a handful of the dried herbs. The smell changed immediately, warm and sharp and green. Old food becoming something better than itself. Soline sat down on the floor near the stove and pulled the blanket tighter and watched me cook without saying anything. We ate slowly, side by side, backs against the wall bowls on our knees, fire crackling in the stove. The potatoes were soft inside and slightly crisp on the edges where the pan had gotten hottest, and the herbs made everything sharper and cleaner than it had any right to be. Neither of us spoke for a while. There are meals that don't need conversation. This was one of them. Then Soline said, "My dad used to say you were a really good cook." I kept my eyes on my bowl. "When did he say that?" I said. "When I was little, before." She paused. "He didn't talk about you a lot, but when he did, that was one of the things he said." I didn't answer for a moment. "He didn't like my pot roast," I said finally. "He always said it was too dry." A small sound from Soline, almost a laugh. Not quite. "He still hates dry pot roast," she said. "Good," I said. "Some things should stay consistent." The almost laugh again. Closer to real this time. We didn't talk about the rest of it. Not then. There was too much rest of it, and the room was warm, and the food was good. And sometimes you have to let a thing be small before it can be larger. After breakfast, I pushed open the wooden door and stepped outside. Cold morning air, silver fog between the trees, thin sunlight starting to come through from the east, not warm yet, but present, doing its best. Behind the hill, hidden from the direction we'd come from a narrow trail, almost invisible under the tall grass. I almost walked past it entirely. I didn't, because I am a person who has spent her entire life noticing the things other people walk past. It is a habit from nursing, the detail that doesn't match, the things slightly out of place, the small signal that means something larger. I followed the trail around the slope. Soline caught up to me 2 minutes later, still pulling on her jacket, and we walked together around the curve of the hill and then stopped. Both of us, at the same moment, because there was a garden, wild, untouched by any human hand in years, maybe longer, but alive. The apple trees had grown into their own shapes, no longer trimmed into rows, their branches reaching wherever the light was. Thick bushes of currants along an old fence line, the fence itself half buried in earth. Stone paths that you could only see if you knew to look for them, emerging briefly from the long grass before disappearing again. Nature had been taking the garden back slowly, but it hadn't finished yet. Soline moved first. She pushed through the long grass toward the nearest apple tree and reached up into the branches. I heard her make a sound, and then she turned around, holding a small red apple. Imperfect, a little bruised on one side, skin slightly dulled by cold and time. Real. Her face in that moment. I don't have the right words for it. I'm not sure words are the right instrument. The face of a 19-year-old girl who has been carrying something very heavy for longer than 19-year-olds should carry things, and who has just found a red apple in a wild garden hidden behind a hill. The particular quality of surprise that comes when something good happens when you had fully stopped expecting it to. I don't think either of us had smiled like that in a long time. We spent the rest of the morning in the garden, found more apples on the lower branches and on the ground most too far gone, but a few still good. Found wild rosemary growing in thick bunches near the old stone paths. Found what I was fairly sure was a patch of wild chives near the fence. By the time we came back inside, our arms were full and our boots were wet, and Soline was talking about the apple trees the way she talked about things she was interested in quickly, and specifically in a way I hadn't heard from her before. She knew things about apple varieties, old ones, heritage ones, the kind people stopped growing because the commercial orchards didn't want them. My mom had a thing about heirloom plants, she said, setting the apples carefully on the shelf. She used to drag me to these old seed swaps. I hated it when I was little, but she paused. I know what I'm looking at now. How old were you when she left? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. 9, she said. I nodded. I didn't push it further. Some things are given in small pieces or not at all. That afternoon, while Soline washed the apples with water from the old metal bucket we'd found under the shelf, I began working on the walls. The timber needed checking. Some of the boards had separated slightly from their frames, not structural damage, just the kind of slow drift that happens to old wood over time. I found tools in the storage room, a hammer, a short pry bar, a coffee tin of nails. I started with the wall nearest the stove, pressed on each board systematically, most solid, a few with give. I marked the loose ones with a piece of chalk from the same tin as the nails. Halfway through the second wall, my hammer struck something different. Hollow. A sound that was not the sound of timber against earth. A pocket of air behind the boards. I stopped, tapped again. 3 places along the same board. Hollow, hollow, hollow. "Soline," I said. She looked up from the apples. "Come here." I worked the pry bar carefully into the seam of the board and eased it away from the frame. Slowly, not forcing. The wood was old, and I didn't want to split it. A year of nursing teaches you that there is almost always a way to do a thing gently if you're willing to take more time. The board came free in a small shower of old dust. Behind it was a space, not large, not a room, just a shallow void between the timber and the earth behind it, maybe 2 feet deep and 3 feet wide. The kind of hidden pocket that someone builds with intention. The kind that doesn't happen by accident. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth that had once been cream-colored and was now the color of old paper, were 2 things. A notebook, small, bound in brown leather, worn smooth at the corners and edges from years of handling, and a key, small, silver. Or it had been silver once. Now it was darkened by time to the color of a winter sky. The kind of key that opens something specific. Not a house key, a chest key, a cabinet key, a this particular lock and no other key. Neither of us moved for a moment. The fire crackled in the stove. Outside, the evening wind had started moving through the trees above us. A sound like breathing. I picked up the notebook first. The leather was cold in my hands. I opened it carefully, the way you open something old that you're not sure will hold together. The spine cracked slightly, but held. The pages were worn yellowed, covered in handwriting. Small, careful. The writing of a person who took their time with words. Notes about the garden, measurements for the stove repair, a list of things to bring next time, observations about the weather in different months. The small practical documentation of a person who had been maintaining a place with great care over a long period of time. And pressed between 2 pages near the middle of the notebook, flat and dry and fragile as a thing made of air, a flower, apple blossom. White petals still holding their shape after what must have been years. Pressed so carefully that even the small yellow center had kept something of its original color. Someone had wanted to keep that. Specifically, out of everything they might have saved. I turned to the last page that had writing on it. Most of it was notes, supply lists, repair records. But at the bottom of the page, in slightly larger letters than the rest, set apart by a line of space, for Margaret, so she could hear the birds and not the world. I read it twice. Celine was reading over my shoulder. I could feel her there. I could feel the moment she got to those words too, because she went very still. "Margaret," she said quietly. "Someone he loved." I said. I closed the notebook gently. I did not show Celine the last page, the one that had been torn out, leaving only a ragged edge along the spine. Someone had removed it deliberately, cleanly, taking whatever was on that page with them. And I did not show her what I had seen on the fragment of the torn edge that remained. A few words in the same careful handwriting as the rest. Just the end of a sentence, all the beginning gone with the missing page. The words that remained said only, "Not let them find the second room." Second room. I sat with that while Celine made tea with the dried herbs and the water we'd boiled, and talked about the apple blossom, and about her mother's seed swaps, and about how strange and good it was that this place was here, that someone had made it so carefully that we had found it when we needed it. I listened and I responded, and I was present. And I kept the notebook in my jacket pocket and the silver key in my closed hand, and I turned the phrase over quietly in my mind. The second room. That night I woke at 3 a.m. At first I didn't know what had woken me. The fire had burned low but not out. Celine was asleep. The room was dark and still. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Above us, on the surface of the hill. Not an animal. Animals don't have that rhythm. Deliberate. Heavy. The footsteps of a person walking with purpose across the earth above our heads. I was out of the bed and across the room in seconds. Extinguished the last candle. Stood in the complete dark with my hand on Celine's shoulder. She woke immediately. I pressed my hand down gently. "Stay still." We listened. The footsteps moved slowly around the perimeter of the hill, stopping, starting again. The sound of someone checking something, looking for something. They stopped directly above the door, right above us. The weight of them pressing in through the earth. I didn't breathe. Celine didn't move. The footsteps stood there for what felt like a very long time. Then they moved away, gradually, getting fainter, into the trees, gone. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. Then Celine said in a voice that was very carefully keeping itself level, "What was that?" "I don't know," I said, which was half true. In the morning, I opened the door and stepped outside into cold gray light. My eyes went to the ground immediately. Footprints, large, heavy boots, the tread of someone who wore working shoes, not hiking shoes. They circled the hill exactly as I'd heard stopping and starting, and they ended at the base of the door. And wedged under the edge of the door, half soaked through from the overnight damp, was a piece of paper. I picked it up. Official letterhead, county insignia. The ink had run slightly, but the words were still clear. Notice of trespass, restricted land, federal conservation designation, violators subject to immediate prosecution, and at the bottom, a signature, Deputy H. Voss, Calder County Sheriff's Office. I stood outside the underground house in the cold morning air and held the wet piece of paper and looked at the tree line. No movement, no sound. Whoever Deputy Voss was, he was gone now. But he had been here. He had stood on this hill in the dark, and he had heard nothing and found nothing, and he had left a warning where he knew we would find it. And that meant he knew we were here. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket with the notebook and the silver key. 3 things. A key with no lock I could find. A notebook with a torn out page. And a warning from a man I'd never met. I went back inside and told Soline to stay away from the windows and to keep the smoke from the stove as low as she could manage. And then I sat down with the notebook again and started from the beginning, reading everything this time, every word. The notebook had 94 pages. I know because I counted them twice. It is a nurse habit. You count what you can count when everything else is uncertain. 87 pages had writing on them. The last 7 were blank, and the torn-out page, whatever had been on it, was gone somewhere into the world with whoever had removed it. I started from the beginning, not the way I'd read it the first time, quickly looking for danger. This time, slowly. The way you read a patient's chart when something isn't adding up, and you need to understand the whole picture before you understand any of it. Elias Croft had started the notebook in the spring of 1979. The first entry was practical, materials needed, timber dimensions, the load-bearing calculations for a room built into the side of a hill. He'd drawn small diagrams in the margins, the kind of drawings a man makes when he knows exactly what he's building and is working out the details on paper so his hands can follow without thinking. He was a builder. That much was clear immediately. Not a professional contractor. A man who had learned to build things because he needed them built, and no one else was going to do it. The second entry was different. It said only Margaret liked the location. Said she could hear the creek from the slope. That's enough. I read that twice. Then I turned the page. He'd spent the summer and fall of 1979 building the main room. The entries tracked the progress, framing, flooring, the installation of the stove, the shelves. He wrote about problems the way a person writes about things they've solved briefly without drama already in the past tense. The stove flue gave him trouble. He redesigned it twice. The floor in the far corner sat lower than he wanted, because of a root system he hadn't anticipated. He packed it with gravel and relaid the boards, and between the practical entries every few pages, a single line about Margaret. She rested well yesterday. Her color is better in the hill air. She asked me to plant rosemary near the east wall. I will do that in the spring. She said it smells like somewhere safe. I don't know what that means exactly, but I am glad she feels it. I sat with the notebook in my lap and the stove going low, and the morning coming through the cracks of the door in thin, cold lines of light, and I read every one of those lines. Margaret had been ill. That was clear without him ever naming what it was. The entries about her health were careful and measured the way a person writes when they are managing fear by converting it into logistics. She needs quiet. She needs clean air. She needs to hear the birds and not the traffic, and not the hospital sounds, and not the sound of people being carefully optimistic at her. So he built her a place where she could have those things. That was what this room was. Not a shelter from anything dangerous. Not a hiding place. A gift. I looked up from the notebook at the walls of the room around me. The handmade shelves, the careful stove repair, the hook where the iron pan hung. Every detail of this room had been thought about, placed, maintained, not for any reason except that someone had wanted the person they loved to feel safe and cared for, and not like the world was ending. I closed the notebook for a moment, 62 years old, sitting on a stranger's floor, and I had to breathe through something that was trying to come up, and I wasn't ready for it to come up yet. Not with Soline asleep 10 feet away. Not with the deputy's warning in my pocket, and a key that fit nothing I'd found yet. I breathed in, out, and then I opened the notebook again and kept reading. Margaret died in the spring of 1991. There was no entry for that day. The entries simply stopped in February notes about the stove, the garden, the rosemary coming back, and then resumed in June, and the June entry said only, "She passed in April." I stayed. I didn't know what else to do with myself, and the hill needed work, so I stayed. That was all. No grief. Or rather, grief so compressed it had become a single paragraph. The kind of compression that happens when a person has been carrying something for 2 months and has no one to say it to, and finally writes it down, just to put it somewhere outside themselves. I understood that compression. I had written things like that, not in notebooks, in the margins of nursing paperwork at 3 in the morning when the night was quiet and there was nowhere for the feeling to go but onto whatever paper was in front of me. He kept the notebook after she died. That was what I hadn't expected. I'd assumed the entries would stop. Why maintain a record of a place built for someone who was gone? But he kept writing every season, every repair, every time the apple trees bloomed, and every time the frost came. Not with the same frequency, sometimes months between entries, but consistent, present. A man still showing up to the thing he'd built because it was what he knew how to do. And then, in 1993, the entries changed. They started arriving from a man named Aldrich Voss. First a letter, then an offer, then another offer higher. Then what Elias described as a visit that was not friendly. A man in a county vehicle who stood outside the door of the Hill House and told Elias the land designation was under review and that it would be in his best interest to settle quickly. Elias wrote, "I told him I wasn't interested in settling." He didn't like that. Then, a notice from the county assessor's office, citing irregularities in the original land claim. I have the original deed. My father's name is on it. I don't know what irregularities they think they found. Then, another notice. Environmental assessment required. Someone filed a complaint about unauthorized structures. The structure has been here since 1979. No one cared until Aldrich Voss started making phone calls. And then one entry in the fall of 1993 in slightly heavier ink than usual, as if he'd pressed harder on the pen. They want the hill, not because of the trees, because of what's under it. I turned the page. The next entry had one word underlined: water. I set the notebook down, stood up, moved to the far wall, pressed my palm flat against the timber. The wall was cold and slightly damp. Not from rain coming through the construction was too solid for that. From below. Underground water will do that to a wall. I knew that from houses I'd lived in. A certain quality of cold that isn't just air temperature. A seep that comes from depth, not surface. There was water under this hill. Not a puddle, not seasonal runoff. Something consistent. Something that had been keeping these walls slightly cool for years, regardless of what the weather was doing above. The kind of water source that a development company would pay a great deal of money to access. The kind of thing that would make a piece of land worth far more than it appeared on a county map. I stood there and thought about the trespass notice in my pocket. Deputy H. Voss, Calder County, Aldrich Voss, 1993. Same name, different generation maybe, or the same one 30 years older. I was still standing at the wall when Soline woke up. She came out of sleep the way young people do, quickly disoriented, for only a second, then present. She looked at me standing at the wall with my palm pressed flat against the timber and said, "What are you doing? Feeling the wall," I said. She looked at me. "Okay," she said, with the particular tone of a 19-year-old choosing not to pursue something. I turned around. "We need to find the second room." Now she was fully awake. I showed her the torn page, the fragment of words at the edge. Not let them find the second room. She read it. Read it again. "There's another room." "There's another room," I said. We looked at each other. Then we both looked around the space we'd been living in for 3 days at the walls we thought we knew. Soline went to the shelves. I went to the back wall. Because if you are building a secret room inside a hill, you don't put it somewhere obvious. You put it somewhere the eye slides past. Somewhere that already looks like it's explained: a solid wall, a built-in structure, a piece of furniture that looks permanent. The shelves. I crossed to where Celine was already running her hands along the backboard of the bottom shelf. The jars rattled slightly. She moved them out of the way, carefully setting them on the floor behind her, and I crouched beside her, and we both pressed on the back panel together. Nothing. I moved to the next section. Pressed. Nothing. Third section. And this time, the smallest give. A flex that wasn't the flex of timber under pressure. The flex of a door in a frame. Not hinged from the side, hinged from the top. A panel that swung inward and down, held in place by a latch that was released from. I looked at the edge of the panel, found the small recessed hole, looked at the silver key in my hand. The key fit. Of course it did. The panel swung inward with a sound like a held breath being released, and behind it was a passage. Low, narrow, just wide enough for one person moving carefully. The smell that came through was different from the main room, older, deeper. The smell of earth that has never been warm. I looked at Celine. She looked at me. "I'll go first," she said. "You will not," I said, and I went first. The passage was short, 6 feet, maybe 8. Enough that the light from the main room didn't reach the end of it. I moved by feel, one hand on the earth wall, until the passage opened out, and I was standing in a room. Smaller than the main room, maybe half the size. The ceiling was lower. No stove, no shelves built for storage. But on the walls, paper, documents, maps, pages from what looked like a local newspaper, yellow and fragile at the edges. Pinned directly to the timber, with small tacks, so many of them that they overlapped in places. A mosaic of information assembled over years. And on the far wall, a small wooden table. And on the table, a box. I stood very still for a moment. Celine came through the passage behind me and stopped beside me, and neither of us spoke. Then she said, "He knew they were coming." "Yes," I said. "He knew." I moved to the documents first. Systematic. Left wall to right wall. The newspaper pages were from the Calder Courier. Different dates across the early 1990s. Local news, county council minutes, a piece about a proposed development project, a wellness resort, the article called it, planned for the Eastern Hill Country. Groundwater access cited as a key resource. Key resource. I have always found it interesting that the word resource is used for things that belong to the earth long before they belong to anyone with a deed. Elias had circled that phrase in the article 3 times, the circles pressing through the old newsprint. The other documents were records, filed complaints with handwritten notes in the margins identifying what he believed was their actual source. Assessment notices, letters from the county, and between them his own records dates, names, a careful log of every contact, every visit, every offer made and refused. Aldrich Voss had been systematic. That was clear. When the offers didn't work, the pressure became administrative. When the administrative pressure didn't work, it became something else. The last entry in the log was dated October 1994. It said, "They've blocked the county road access. Technically legal. The conservation designation gives them that authority for the main road. They think that's enough. They don't know about the East Passage." East Passage. I looked back at the wall, found the map. Hand-drawn, the lines very precise, the hand of a man who measured things before he drew them. The hill in the center. The main entrance marked with a small square, and on the east side of the hill, marked with a dotted line, another route. A way out that wasn't the front door. I thought he built this place for Margaret so she could leave quickly if she needed to. And then it became the way he could leave quickly when the time came. I thought he planned everything. I thought, and then what? He's been gone 30 years. On the small table, the wooden box, plain, undecorated, roughly 12 inches long and 8 inches wide. A simple latch on the front. I opened it. Inside a photograph. Black and white, not from age, but from choice. A cheap camera, the flash creating a flat, even light. A man and a woman standing in front of the oak door, before the moss had grown over it, before the roots had fully taken back the frame. The man was tall and lean, somewhere in his 50s, with the kind of face that comes from years of working outside in all weathers. The woman was seated in a wooden chair that he had clearly carried outside for her, and she was thin, and she was smiling with her whole face. On the back for Margaret, so she could hear the birds and not the world. Elias. Spring 1989. The same words as in the notebook. He'd written them twice. Once in the notebook for himself and once on the back of this photograph for her. Solene was reading the walls, moving slowly along the document's arms folded against the cold lips, moving slightly, the way they did when she was processing something quickly and wanted to catch every word. I watched her reach the section with the Calder Courier article. Watched her find the circled phrase. Watched her stand very still. "Voss," she said quietly. On the notice outside, Deputy H. Voss. Yes. Same family. Almost certainly. She turned to look at me. Her face was doing several things at once. "So he's not actually here about conservation?" "No," I said. "I don't think he is. He's here because of the water. Or because of what's in this room," I said. "Or both. Most likely both." She looked back at the walls, at all of it, all the careful documentation a man had assembled to protect himself from something that had come for him anyway. Did they? She stopped. I don't know, I said. He disappeared in 1995. There's no record of what happened after October 1994. No record you've found, she said. No record I've found. I agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and started photographing the walls. Methodically, section by section. Not asking if she should, just doing it. Good girl. I thought it and didn't say it because she was 19 and would have found it patronizing, and she would have been right. I picked up the photograph of Elias and Margaret and looked at it for a long time. Then I put it carefully in the inside pocket of my jacket next to the notebook. We were still in the second room when we heard it. Both of us heard it at the same time. The way you hear something with your whole body before your brain has named it. A vibration in the earth above us. Then footsteps. Then a voice. Not one voice. Two. And a sound that turned my stomach immediately. The specific sound of a dog working a scent. A dog that has found something. Celine looked at me. I put my finger to my lips. We stood absolutely still in the small, cold room while the sounds above us organized themselves into something I could read. 2 sets of footsteps, moving with purpose, coming from the direction of the main entrance. Then a voice close enough to make the earth above us feel thin. A man's voice. Official. The voice of a person who is accustomed to being the authority in a given situation. I know someone's been in here. Stove's been used. Recently. A pause. Then, this is your one warning. Come out now and we handle this as a simple trespass violation. You don't come out, I come back with a full order and we handle it differently. Neither of us moved. I was watching Celine. Her jaw was set. She was breathing through her nose. She was scared. She was also not going to show it more than she could help, which I recognized because I was her grandmother, and I had been doing the exact same thing for 60 years. The footsteps moved around the exterior. The dog sounds came closer, then moved away. The man's voice said something I couldn't make out to whoever was with him. Then, silence. A long silence. Then a sound I hadn't anticipated. Not the door opening, not the footsteps leaving. The sound of a lock. A padlock from the specific sound of it. A heavy one, the shackle going through the exterior latch and clicking shut. Then footsteps, moving away, getting fainter, taking the dog with them. Gone. Celine and I looked at each other in the dark. He locked us in, she said. Yes, I said. From outside. Yes. So we can't. Not through the main door, I said. No. She looked at the passage entrance, back at me. The map, she said. The East Passage, I said. We stood there in the small room, and I let myself feel the full weight of it for exactly 3 seconds. Locked underground by a man with a badge and a dog who knew we were here and had decided that trapping us was simpler than confronting us in daylight. 3 seconds. Then I picked up the map from the wall and folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. "We're going to be fine," I said. Solene looked at me. "How do you know?" "Because he locked us in instead of arresting us," I said. "Which means he doesn't want witnesses, which means he doesn't want this going anywhere official, which means whatever is in these walls is worth more to him kept secret than prosecuted." She stared at me for a moment. "That's actually reassuring," she said. "Good," I said. "Hold on to that." I went back to the table, opened the wooden box again. There was something I'd missed the first time, beneath the photograph, a folded piece of paper I'd taken for packing material and set aside. I unfolded it. A hand-drawn detail of the East Passage. More specific than the map. Measurements. The width at the narrowest point he'd written tight but passable for a grown person moving carefully. The exit point marked with a small notation stone outcrop east face behind the large briar, approximately 200 feet from main entrance. He had mapped a way out. He had always mapped a way out. I showed it to Solene. She looked at the dimensions. "Tight but passable," she read aloud. "We'll manage," I said. But we didn't move immediately, because I was not quite done with the room. I went back to the walls, back to the section I hadn't finished reading, because there was a section I'd skimmed past in the first Sweepnot newspaper. Personal letters, filed in a short stack and pinned together with a single tack. I unpinned them and read them quickly. 3 letters, all from the same person. A name I didn't know. A woman who appeared to be a county records officer writing to Elias informally, not on county letterhead personal stationery. Warning him. The land reclassification was coming. The process had been initiated from inside the county office itself. She couldn't say more in writing. The last letter was dated September 1994. It said, "Elias, I don't know who else is involved in this yet. I'm trying to find out. Keep the record safe. Keep yourself safe. If something happens and I can't reach you, know that I'm not done trying. Signed with initials only, DC." I stared at those initials for a moment. Then I folded the letters and added them to my jacket pocket with everything else. We'd been in the dark long enough. I held the candle, and Solene held the map, and we went to find the East Passage. It was behind the far wall of the second room, exactly where the map said it would be. Not a door this time, not a latch, just a place where 2 boards met in a frame that sat flush against a section of earth wall. And when you pressed on it at exactly the right angle, it shifted inward and became an entrance. The passage beyond was lower than the one between the 2 rooms, and longer, and colder, the cold of deep earth, with no fire nearby to temper it. The candle flame bent sideways in a draft that I realized after a moment was coming from outside. Moving air. The passage was connected to the surface. We moved through it single file, slowly. the ceiling low enough that I had to bend slightly, and Soline behind me, bending more, and neither of us speaking because there wasn't room for words in there, along with everything else. And then the earth opened, a widening, the ceiling rising, the draft becoming real airflow. And at the end of the passage, a scramble up a short incline of packed earth, reinforced with old stones, and then an opening, not large, not dignified, barely big enough to emerge from, without losing what remained of your self-respect. But an opening, and on the other side of it, cold air and gray early light, and the smell of pine and coming rain. I helped Soline through. She helped me find my footing on the damp earth outside. We stood for a moment and breathed. The exit was exactly where the map had placed it, the stone outcrop. The large briar, leafless now in November, still formidable. We were on the east face of the hill behind it from where we'd entered the main entrance around the curve and out of sight. Soline straightened up, pulled leaves from her jacket, looked at me. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. She had her phone out, immediately pulling up the photos she'd taken of the documents in the second room, checking they were there. All of them. Good. "There's no signal here," she said. "There wasn't signal anywhere near the main entrance either," I said. "We need to move east, away from the hill, get high enough for signal." She nodded, and then she stopped, because there was someone already there, standing at the edge of the briar, maybe 20 feet away on the other side of the outcrop. A woman, older than me, lean and weathered in a coat that had been good quality 20 years ago and had been maintained carefully since then. Gray hair cut short and practical. Eyes that were sharp and tired in equal measure and were currently fixed on both of us with an expression that was not surprise. Not surprise at all. The expression of someone who has been waiting for a very long time. We looked at each other across the cold morning air. She spoke first. "You found the second room," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. "And you have the notebook." I didn't answer immediately. You don't confirm things to strangers in the woods, not even old women with tired eyes and careful coats. "Who are you?" I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out something small and held it toward me. A photograph, different from the one I'd found in the box. Color this time faded to pastels by age. Two people standing in front of a house, not the hill house, a regular house, a porch, and a yard. A man and a young woman, maybe 16 or 17. The man had his hand on her shoulder, and they were both squinting into the sun. I looked at the photograph. I looked at the woman in front of me. The shape of the jaw, the way she held her shoulders. "Della Croft," she said. "Elias was my father." Della Croft had been standing in that forest for 2 hours. She told us this matter-of-factly, the way you state a fact that you've already made your peace with. 2 hours in the November cold, with a coat that had been good 20 years ago, watching the east face of the hill and waiting to see if the people who'd been living inside her father's house would come out the right way or not at all. She had seen the smoke from the stove 3 days ago. She had watched from the tree line the first night, and the second. She had seen Voss come with his dog. She had heard the padlock, and she had waited at the East Passage exit because it was the only other way out, and she had known about it for 30 years. "You knew about the passage," I said. "My father showed me," she said, "when I was 17. He said if anything ever happened, I should wait at the east face. He said someone would come out eventually." She said it without emotion, as if she had simply filed that instruction away in 1977 and carried it with her for 48 years without putting it down. I looked at her face. The particular quality of a person who has been waiting so long that the waiting has become a kind of identity. It was not a sad face. It was not an angry face. It was the face of someone who decided a long time ago that they were going to outlast something and has been doing exactly that year after year in a state of quiet, relentless patience. I recognized it. I had worn versions of it myself. "Come away from the hill," I said, "before he comes back." She nodded once and fell into step beside us without another word, as if we had been walking together for years. We moved east, through the pines, away from the hill and the locked door and the padlock and whatever Harlan Voss was planning to do next. The ground was soft from the overnight rain, and our footsteps made no sound. Celine was ahead of us, slightly phone in hand, watching the signal indicator. I walked beside Della, and we didn't speak for a few minutes, and that was fine. Some things don't need to be rushed into words. Then she said, "Did you find the box?" "Yes," I said. "The photograph?" "Yes." A pause. "She was beautiful," I said. "Margaret." Della's jaw moved, just slightly, the micro-expression of someone receiving something they have wanted to hear for a very long time and are not going to let themselves feel fully yet because they are still in the middle of something. "Yes," she said. She was. We kept walking. Soline's voice came from ahead of us. "1 bar." "Keep going," I said. 2 minutes later, 2 bars. "Stop there," I said. "Send everything." She sent it. All the photographs she'd taken in the second room, every document, every wall, every page of the Calder Courier clippings with Elias's circled phrases. The letters from D.C., which I now understood, the initials clicking into place, now that I knew who Della was, and who her father was, and what had been happening in Calder County in 1994. D.C. Della Croft. She had been the county records officer who'd been trying to warn him. I looked at her. "The letters?" I said. "The ones signed with initials." She didn't look surprised. "You found those too. You were trying to help him." I was 24 years old and working in the county records office, and I found the reclassification request buried in a stack of routine filings. Her voice was even, factual, the voice of someone who has told this story to themselves so many times, it has become smooth and stripped of its jagged edges. I knew what it meant. I knew who had filed it. I tried to warn him. But I was 24 years old, she said again, and the people involved were not people a 24-year-old in a county records office could stop. We stood there in the cold pines while Soline's phone finished sending. What happened to him? I said. It wasn't quite a question. Della was quiet for a moment. He left in the winter of 1995, she said. He told me he was going east. He had a friend in Virginia who could put him up while he figured out the next step. He said he was going to find a lawyer, someone outside the county. She paused. I got one letter from him in February, then nothing. Did you? I looked, she said. For years, I hired someone to look when I had money for it. I never found anything that told me clearly what happened. Another pause. I believe he's gone. I accepted that a long time ago. What I never accepted was the rest of it. The rest of it. 30 years of a man's life. 30 years of a place he built with his hands and his love being slowly reclaimed by vines and moss, while the people who'd driven him out waited to collect. Sent, Soline said. She looked up from her phone. All of it, to my backup email and 2 other addresses. She looked at Della. Who do we send it to from here? Della reached into her coat pocket and took out a card. Old. The edges slightly soft from years in that pocket. She handed it to Soline, a lawyer's name, a firm in Nashville. I've had that card for 11 years, Della said, waiting for the day I had something worth sending. Soline looked at the card, looked at Della. Then she dialed. It was early, not quite 7 in the morning. It went to voicemail. Soline left a message that was clear and specific and included the word evidence 3 times, and I thought this girl is going to be fine. Whatever she was before this week, she is going to be fine. We were standing there in a loose triangle in the cold pines, watching Soline hang up and start composing an email when we heard the footsteps. Not subtle this time, fast, from the direction of the hill. I turned around. Harlan Voss came through the trees at a pace that was not quite running, but close to it. He was in his uniform, no dog this time, just himself, and the momentum of a man who has discovered that his plan has gone sideways and is moving fast enough that he hasn't yet decided what he's going to do about it. He stopped when he saw the 3 of us. 3. His eyes moved from me to Soline to Della. And when they landed on Della, something changed in his face. Not guilt exactly, not quite. More like the look of a man who has been carrying a piece of information for a long time and has just had it land in front of him in a form he wasn't prepared for. Della Croft, he said. Harlan Voss, she said. 40 years and 2 names. He looked at me. You had no legal right to be on that land. You had no legal right to lock us in an underground room, I said. That door was already locked. The padlock was warm, I said. I checked. That was a lie. I hadn't checked the padlock, but it was a very specific kind of lie, the kind that is probably true, and that puts the other person in the position of having to deny a detail they can't easily disprove. 30 years of nursing. You learn how to hold a room. He looked at Soline, at her phone. Whatever you think you found in there. We found everything, Soline said, and it's already sent. So, that one word, 19 years old, and she dropped it like a period at the end of an argument that was over. I had a sudden, vivid understanding of why her father might have found her difficult, and also why that was entirely his loss. Voss looked at all 3 of us. And here is the thing about a man who has been operating in a particular way for a long time. He is accustomed to having things resolve in his favor, not because of strength, but because of the absence of resistance. No one pushes back. No one has the documentation. No one stays long enough to understand what they've found. The whole system of it depends on people eventually going away. We were not going away. He could see that. The momentum went out of him. Not dramatically, just a slow deflation, like something that has been held under pressure for a long time and has finally found a small leak. He stood in the cold pines and looked at the 3 of us and did not have a next move. The land reclassification in 1993 was filed under a name that no longer works at the county, Della said. She was not loud. She was not angry. She was simply precise. The voice of a woman who has been preparing this sentence for 30 years. The original deed is in the county records. My father's name is on it. I have the records request that was filed to suppress it. I have the names of the people who filed it. She paused. I have had all of that for a long time. What I didn't have until this morning was everything in that second room. Voss said nothing. The lawyer in Nashville has a copy of everything as of 6:43 this morning, Soline said, looking at her phone. Email delivered. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the hill. Then he looked at the ground in front of his own feet. And then he turned and walked back into the trees. Not running, not fast. The walk of a man who is recalculating. Who knows that this particular version of events is over and is already beginning to work out what happens next? I watched him go. My heart was doing something irregular. The particular beat of a body that has been running on adrenaline for longer than it should and is now being told it can stop. I breathed slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The old technique. Soline appeared beside me and put her hand on my arm. I looked at her. You okay? She said. I'm 62, I said. I've had worse mornings. She almost smiled. Name one. The morning your grandfather died, I said. A pause. "Fair," she said quietly. We stood together in the cold pines for a moment. Della was a few feet away, looking in the direction Voss had gone, her expression unreadable. Then Soline said, "What do we do now?" And Della turned around and looked at both of us and said, "We go back inside." I looked at her. "The padlock," I said. "I have a key," she said. Of course she did. The key Della had was not small and silver. It was a regular padlock key on a plain ring kept in the same pocket as the lawyer's card. She had had it made years ago from a wax impression her father had left her, in case he'd said. She'd never used it, until now. We went back around the hill, through the wet grass, past the apple trees that were bare now, their branches against the gray sky like something drawn with a single careful line. Della unlocked the padlock without ceremony and opened the oak door, and the smell came up again. Dry herbs, old wood, the ghost of every fire that had ever been lit in that stove. We went down, the three of us, single file, into the warmth that was still there, banked low in the stove, waiting. Soline got the fire going again. Della stood in the middle of the main room and looked at it. All of it, the walls, the shelves, the iron pan on its hook, the floor her father had laid, the stove he had repaired twice, and the patch at the base that had held for 30 years. Her face was doing something I didn't have a name for. Not grief, past grief. The particular expression of a person standing inside something they thought they had lost completely and finding it still intact, still holding, still itself. She touched the shelf, just her fingertips lightly, the way you touch something to make sure it's real. "He kept it so well," she said, quietly, almost to herself. "He kept it after she was gone," I said. "He wrote about it, that he didn't know what else to do with himself, and the hill needed work, so he stayed." Della was quiet for a moment. "That was him," she said. "He was not a man who could sit still with grief. He had to put it somewhere, into something." A pause. "He built the fence around the garden 3 times, not because it kept failing, because he needed to keep building it." I thought about that, about the 3 things that keep a person alive when the person they built their life around is gone. Work, routine, and the strange sustaining power of maintaining a place that mattered to someone you loved, even after they're no longer there to see it. I had been doing a version of that for 14 months, mowing the lawn of a house I was losing, cleaning windows no one would look through, cooking meals for 1 person in a kitchen built for 2. It is not sadness exactly. It is the momentum of love that no longer has its original destination and has to go somewhere. Soline came back from the stove and sat down on the floor near it and pulled the blanket around her shoulders and looked at both of us. 2 older women standing in a small underground room, each carrying 30 years of something they hadn't put down yet. "Okay," she said. "Someone needs to explain to me who DC is. Was, because I think I know, but I want to be sure. Della looked at her. Where did you see those initials? The letters on the wall in the second room. The woman who was trying to warn your father. D.C. Della Croft, I said. Celine looked at Della. You were trying to warn him, Celine said. And then he disappeared anyway. Yes, Della said, and you've been trying to fix it ever since. Yes. Celine sat with that for a moment. For 30 years, she said. For 30 years, Della said. Another moment. Okay, Celine said. I just want to say that is a level of commitment that I find genuinely. She stopped, started again. That's a lot of years to keep going. It is, Della agreed. How? Celine said, not rude, genuinely asking, the way young people sometimes ask old people things that young people haven't yet had to learn. How do you keep going when it takes that long? Della looked at her for a moment. You find smaller things to do, she said. You can't look at 30 years at once. It's too big. So you find the next small thing. File the next record request. Make the next phone call. Put the lawyer's card in your pocket. Wait another season. A pause. My father built this place one board at a time. He didn't build it all at once because you can't. You just do the next board. Celine was quiet. I was quiet. The fire crackled. Then I remembered the box on the table in the second room. I had taken the photograph, but there had been something else, something I'd taken for packing material and set aside in the hurry of finding the East Passage map. I went back through the passage. The box was still on the table where I'd left it. I opened it, removed the photograph again. And underneath where the photograph had been the folded piece of paper I'd dismissed, unfolded it small, 1 page. The handwriting was the same as the notebook, careful, taking its time. But this was different from the notebook. Not a record, not a log, not a supply list or a repair note. A letter, addressed to no one specifically, or rather, addressed to whoever. I read it once quickly. Then I stood in the cold, small room in the hill in November in Calder County, Tennessee, and I read it again slowly. Then I folded it and put it in my pocket and went back through the passage. Celine and Della both looked up when I came back. I held the letter. There's something you need to hear, I said. I unfolded it, and I read it aloud, because some things need to be spoken into the air to become real. Because Elias Croft had written this for whoever would find his house, and whoever had found it was us, and 30 years was long enough for it to wait. His handwriting was in my voice now. His words in this room where he had spent so many years. He had written, Margaret passed in the spring. I stayed anyway. Not because I was brave, because I didn't know how to leave a place she'd been happy in. I kept the stove lit, and I kept the garden, and I talked to her sometimes when I was working, which I know sounds like something a person shouldn't admit to, but I'm admitting it anyway. I don't know who will find this. I don't know when. I hope it's someone who needed it. I hope you were cold enough when you found the door to understand why it was worth building. I hope you stayed for at least one night and felt what it feels like to be underground and warm when the world outside is difficult. I am not a man who had much to give. No money, no power, nothing that moved in straight lines through the official world. But I could build, and I could maintain, and I could love someone so thoroughly that the place I built for her still has that in the walls, if you know how to feel for it. If you found this place, take whatever you need. The garden will give if you give back to it. The stove will hold if you don't rush it. The apple trees are older than they look and more resilient. Leave it better than you found it. That is all I have ever asked of anyone. And if by some long chance my daughter finds this, Della, if this is you, I need you to know that I did not stop trying. I just ran out of road before I could finish. I'm sorry it fell to you. You were always stronger than I told you. I should have said it more. That was all. I folded the letter. The room was very quiet. Della was looking at the floor. Her hands were in her lap, very still. The stillness of a person holding something that is too large for the expression she has available. Soline was not trying to hold anything. She had her knees pulled to her chest and her face turned slightly away, and she was crying quietly, the way people cry when they're not trying to cry, and it happens anyway. I stood there with the letter in my hands. I had read it in Elias Croft's voice, or the voice I'd assembled for him from 94 pages of his handwriting. A man I'd never met. A man who had been gone since before Soline was born. A man who had built a room underground for love and spent 30 years maintaining it out of the same feeling with nowhere else to go. I thought about Garrett, my husband, 31 years, the house I'd lost, the garden I'd maintained, the coffee on the porch every morning as if someone were still coming out to sit beside me. The way grief becomes its own kind of housekeeping. You keep doing the things because the things are all you have left of the life. Elias had understood that. He had built a whole underground house out of it. I sat down on the floor near the stove and leaned my back against the wall and let myself be in the room for a moment without thinking about what came next. Just the fire. Just the warm air. Just the walls that had held for 45 years and were still holding. Della looked up eventually. Her eyes were dry. She was past the kind of crying that uses tears, but something in her face had changed. Some long-held tension, the kind that lives so deep in the jaw and the neck that a person stops noticing it had gone out of her. He knew I'd find it, she said. He hoped. I said, there's a difference. No, she shook her head. He knew. My father was not a man who hoped without reason. She looked at the walls. He built the East Passage so I could get in without being seen. He left the key with me. He put the letter in the box and not the notebook because he knew I'd look in the box. A pause. He knew I'd keep looking. He knew me. I thought about what it meant to build a room for someone you loved and then to leave a message in it for your daughter. And then to trust that the room would hold and the message would wait and the right person would find it and bring it to her. 45 years of a building holding what a man had put inside it. I thought sometimes what we build outlasts what we can say. The rest of the morning moved differently than anything that had come before it. Della made calls. The lawyer in Nashville had listened to Soline's voicemail and had already emailed back by 8:15. The documents were sufficient to open a formal challenge to the land reclassification. The original deed, once pulled from county records, would establish the Croft claim clearly. There were other things Della had been collecting for years in a filing cabinet in her apartment in Knoxville that would reinforce it. Voss did not come back that day. He may have been consulting someone. He may have been calculating. He may have simply been sitting somewhere doing the slow arithmetic of a man who has just watched 30 years of quiet advantage walk out of a hill through a passage he didn't know existed. Soline fixed the fence in the garden in the afternoon, not because anyone asked her to. She found the tools in the storage room, and she went out and she started on the section nearest the apple trees. And she worked at it with the focused quiet of a person who needs to do something with her hands. I watched her from the doorway of the hill house for a while. Then I went out and helped her. We worked without talking much. The fence posts needed resetting more than replacing. They had shifted in the ground, not rotted through. I held them vertical while Soline packed the earth back around the base and tamped it down. Systematic, one post at a time. Della came out after an hour and stood watching us for a moment. Then she went back inside and came out with 3 apples from the ones we'd brought in earlier and handed one to each of us. We ate apples and fixed a fence in November. Simple things, the kind that do not feel small when you are doing them. Later, when the light was going and the cold was coming back in earnest, we sat inside around the stove. Della had found a tin of tea in the back of the storage room, dried and old, but still functional. We drank tea in old cups, and the fire went its own pace, and the wind moved through the trees above us. Soline had her phone and was composing something. She was writing carefully, taking her time, deleting things and starting again. I didn't ask what it was. She would tell me or she wouldn't. After a while, she looked up and said, "I'm writing to my dad." I looked at her. "I don't know what to say exactly," she said. "I don't know how to explain all of this in a way that makes sense." "You don't have to explain all of it," I said. "What do I say?" I thought about it. "Tell him you found me," I said. "Tell him I'm okay. Tell him—" I stopped. What do you tell a son who has spent 11 years protecting himself from the version of his mother that hurt him? What do you say across that much distance? Not everything. Not yet. You do the next board. Tell him I'm okay, I said, and that I'd like to hear his voice when he's ready. That's enough for now. Celine looked at me for a moment. Then she looked back at her phone and kept writing. Della was watching the fire. What will you do? I said to her, after all this moves forward, with the land. She was quiet for a moment. I'd like to see the garden come back properly, she said, the way my father had it. A pause. He grew things in the summer, beans, tomatoes. He had a way with the clay soil out here that I never understood. He said you have to be patient with clay. You can't rush it. He sounds like a good teacher, I said. He was a good man, she said, which is not the same thing, but is better. The fire went for a while. Then Della said, You could stay. I looked at her. Through the winter, she said, while the legal process moves forward, someone should be here. The land claim is stronger with occupants. She looked at me steadily. And I think you don't have somewhere else to be. I thought about the storage unit in town, the savings account that would last 8 months if I was careful, the retirement that covered almost nothing, the car that had broken down on Route 9. I thought about the way this room smelled, dry herbs and old wood and smoke that had lived in the walls for 45 years. I thought about Celine fixing the fence post, the focused quiet of her hands, the apple she'd eaten standing in the garden. I'll think about it, I said. Della nodded. That was enough for her. Celine looked up from her phone. I already decided, she said, for what it's worth. I'm staying. I looked at her, 19 years old, hair still going in several directions, tea cooling in a cup she'd found on the second shelf, looking at me with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere after a very long journey and is not interested in moving again immediately. When did you decide? I said. The apple tree, she said. First morning. I thought about the apple, small, imperfect, a little bruised, the way she had turned around holding it. Some things you know in your body before you know them in your mind. That night, I took the notebook out and opened it to the first page and read the first entry one more time. The hand-drawn diagrams in the margins, the load-bearing calculations, the materials list. The first line, Margaret liked the location, said she could hear the creek from the slope. That's enough. That's enough. 2 words that are sometimes the most radical thing you can say. Not I want more. Not I deserve better. Not I am owed something different. Just this. Here. Now. The creek sound and the hill air and the person beside you who is warm. That's enough. I closed the notebook. Outside, the wind moved through the apple trees. I could hear them faintly through the earth, a low sound, like breathing, like the hill itself, respiring through its roots and its cold soil and its 45 years of quietly keeping things intact. Soline was asleep. Della was asleep in the chair she'd pulled close to the stove. I sat for a while longer in the light of the fire. Then I got up and found the small knife in the kitchen drawer, the one Elias had used for the garden, a short blade worn smooth on the handle from years of the same hand. I went to the wall beside the door. Elias's line was there, pressed into the wood, careful as everything else he'd done. If you are cold, stay. If you are afraid, stay longer. I set the blade to the wood beside it, not above it, not below it, beside it, as if we were sitting next to each other, as if the wall had room for both. I am not a carver. My lines were rougher than his, but they were legible, and they were true. When I was done, I stepped back and read both lines together. His and mine. Then I put the knife back in the drawer and went to bed. In the morning, we would call the lawyer again. We would begin the process of bringing Elias Croft's careful documentation into the light of the official world, where it could do what it had always been intended to do. We would file records and make calls and move through the slow machinery of justice, which is almost never fast and almost always worth it. But that was morning. That was the next board. For now, there was just the fire, and the hill around us, and the apple trees outside doing their patient November work of being alive in the cold without apology. And on the wall beside the door, 2 lines of words, his and mine. If you are cold, stay. If you are afraid, stay longer. And beneath it, in rougher letters, pressed into the same wood, in the hand of a woman who had spent 62 years learning the difference between surviving and staying. We found this place broken and cold and full of someone else's love. We stayed. We fixed the fence. We kept the stove lit. We will leave it better than we found it. That is all any of us can do. And honestly, sometimes it is everything.